Ah, I'll sign it later. Thank you. I got into Cambridge without having any idea that I was the slightest bit creative. Creativity, which just means knowing how to come up with a better idea, was never mentioned at my school. But then I joined the Cambridge Footlights, and I found that I could write something on a blank sheet of paper which would make people laugh. And then I discovered something else. If I wrote a sketch in the evening but got stuck and went to bed, when I got up in the morning and sat down at my desk, I saw the solution almost straight away. And this happened so often, I slowly realized that my brain must have been working on the problem while I was asleep. And that's when I decided to try to understand what creativity is all about. And today, I'm going to talk to some people who might be able to help me. I'm going to start with a great lyricist. Yes, you. Tim Rice, ladies and gentlemen. And Tim, why or when did you first sense you could be creative?
Well, I think I was inclined to be creative from a young age, but I had no concept of being creative. I thought I was just writing
You just thought that
nice
was the way
poems for my mum.
it was, yeah.
I remember writing for her 28th birthday almost a whole book
Really?
of poems and drawings. I mean, they were terrible, but I always wanted to write things. But I had no concept whatsoever of this could be something that would be a career. It was fun.
Or even unusual.
You're right, I didn't think it was unusual. My brothers did much the same thing a few years later. And I think my parents were both writers to a certain extent. My mother very much so. So I suppose
So you
it
were
seemed natural.
used to this atmosphere.
Yes,
Yeah.
but we weren't running around thinking what a creative, artistic family we were.
No, because it was so natural for your family. Yeah. You were kind enough to have a look at that little book I wrote about creativity.
Yes.
Was there anything in it that you disagreed with?
No, I don't.
I don't mind. It'd be more interesting if you did. Yeah. But you see, I find that I have to get into what I call a creative mood before it starts to come. I can't just sit down and start writing.
No, I've totally sympathised with your getting a space and taking time to get into your space and no distractions. And my problem's often been that I tend to look for distractions.
Ah, yes.
You think, I've got to write something.
That's
and
right.
you'd suddenly think, on the other hand, my CDs need to be put in alphabetical order. And I'll do that now because it'll only take 5 minutes.
Yeah.
And that takes...
Or you sort your socks.
Yes,
you sharpen pencils.
Sharpen pencils, all these things.
Anything to avoid the moment.
But if you can get going, but there's so many things you said which rang true, like you get stuck and you go out and take the dog for a walk for half an hour, and when you come back, your brain has recharged.
But a lot of stuff is just given to you, isn't it? Do you know what I mean? Some of it you get to yourself by logic, but a lot of the times the best ideas pop up while you're taking the dog for a walk.
Exactly. And you mentioned there are two parts of your brain, the hare and the tortoise.
Yes.
And your hare is racing ahead with ideas and sometimes comes to a blockage.
Yeah.
But the tortoise tends to be plodding along all along, and you can dip into that without really knowing you're dipping into it.
Well, a lot of thinking is just sort of logic, and you can do that. You don't have to be clever or creative. It would be a waste of time. So when you do that, when you sort of sit down to write, you do eventually, after you've done the socks and sharpened the pencils, you sit down. Then your mind is full of all these things. Oh, I should have called so-and-so, and I haven't bought the cat a birthday present, that sort of stuff.
You've got to get rid of all that.
Then you settle down.
Yes.
And at that point, something starts to happen. Does that describe your...
Yes. It obviously depends to a certain extent on what your task is.
Yeah.
But one of the rules I've always tried to follow is always write something you would like if somebody else had written it. And so you've got a fighting chance when you've finished it of actually quite liking it yourself. You may get fed up with it after a while, but...
But that's very interesting. That seems very difficult.
Well,
somebody else might have written it. No, somebody else would write
if
this.
somebody else had written... I sort of think if I want to write something that I would like if, somebody else had done it. And I think I always have that in the back of my mind, which really means I've got to like it myself. You mustn't try and write something you think is this year's trend.
No. The moment you write for an audience,
Yes.
something goes. It might work financially, but it's never going to be good art.
And I've always said there are really no hard and fast rules, because when we wrote Superstar, we couldn't get anybody to stage it. Any theatrical producer, the Cameron Macintoshes of the day, they said, well, the two guys are unknown, but above all, they said, religion, forget it. It would never work. We'd sort of said rather feebly, well, it's not really a religious piece, it's a story, and it's being told in a new way. And because nobody wanted to stage it, we were forced, our manager managed to get a deal to do it on record. And that was great, because firstly, we ditched any idea of having dialogue, which we'd thought about. And we turned it into an opera, in the sense that it was non-stop music with no speech. And also, we were able to use much bigger forces. Andrew could have a rock band and a big orchestra and a choir, which, had we staged it, even in the West End, you wouldn't have had that in those days. The technology wasn't there. And we probably would have opened in a very nice provincial theatre with a 9-piece band
Yes.
with no rock section.
This is fascinating to hear this.
And the Superstar would have, which originally was just called Jesus Christ, which perhaps was not the ideal title. But it would have probably died the death in some very nice provincial theatre. But doing it on record changed the whole piece, and the record took off like a bullet, not here, but in America.
When you were saying that, I thought you might muse to know that when we were luxuriating in the success of the Holy Grail, we had a meeting, and we said, what are we going to do next? And Eric Idle said, I think we should make a film called Jesus Christ, Lust for Glory. That was our contribution to the religious atmosphere of the time. Tim, I want to introduce a great friend of mine, John Dupre. John has written an immense, come on in, John. He's written an immense amount of music for Monty Python. He wrote the music for Spamalot. And he wrote the music for...
what an honour to meet you, sir.
An honour to meet you, John.
It is, too. And I think he's a bit of a genius, because he can sit down at a piano and within about 4 seconds come up with a tune.
That's just blind panic.
No, but it's an extraordinary... I've never thought of a tune in my life. I don't know how you think of a tune, because the moment I think of a tune, I think, oh, no, it's that tune. You were saying that you were a little bit surprised that Tim sometimes does lyrics from the song. Normally it's the other way around.
Absolutely. It seems to me that a very hard thing to do, that normally the words and the idea, sort of like the way Elton works, that you've said, that the lyric comes first and then you form the tune for the
Well, that's the way
lyric.
Elton works.
Yeah.
When I first worked with him, I assumed, like all composers, he had a lot of great tunes lying around in his locker. And I said, you got any great tunes for this Lion King lark? And he said, no. And I said, have you got any reasonable tunes? Because even a reasonable tune by Elton would be better than most people's tunes. But he said, no, I never write a tune until I get the lyrics. And I didn't know that about him. I knew that Bernie wrote lyrics, by and large, first.
Yes.
But I didn't know that Elton only ever did that.
I'm fascinated. I mean, I'm listening to the radio and something like the Brandenburg Concerto or Honky Tonk Women or Memories or something. It's the way that what becomes a hit or the difference between that and an ordinary song I find absolutely fascinating. And I wonder if it's an external thing, whether I've heard that music's sort of out there and you have to channel it, and that there are sort of musical archetypes out there. I'm interested in that.
I'm sorry, John, I just have to stop you there because I'm getting a lot of signs saying this has become very, very boring. So thank you very much for coming along, Tim.
Pleasure.
And thank you for being so boring, John.